Do you know, I had 3 doctors around me this afternoon, and one of them was as black as the chimbley bag. Oh, he was clean, you could tell. His face shone like black leading. The food's terrible.
This is the story of how Britain's greatest battle axe left Coronation Street not with the dramatic exit she deserved, but through a slow, quiet decline that nobody saw coming, and the complicated truth about what the role of Ena Sharples actually cost her.
Wipe that daft smile off your face.
Have you looked in the mirror lately?
The woman who became Ena Sharples wasn't some unknown actress getting her big break in her 60s. When Coronation Street launched in December 1960, Violet Carson was already 62 years old, and she'd built a proper career over 4 decades. Ancoats, Manchester, on the 1st of September 1898. That's where she was born, though she habitually knocked 7 years off and claimed 1905. Musical prodigy status arrived early. At just 12 years old, she passed Trinity College London's Senior Honours Pianoforte examination, and by 15, she was working as a cinema pianist, accompanying silent films. Her soprano voice and piano skills carried her through BBC Radio's golden age.
I'm giving it up. It's home for me. I think I'll go and make myself a cup of cocoa. Do you fancy one?
Well, if you're sure you can...
Years went by with her as a fixture on Children's Hour and Woman's Hour, which she actually presented for 5 years. Her biggest radio gig was serving as pianist on Wilfred Pickles's Have a Go, the enormously popular quiz show that pulled in over 20 million radio listeners every week. This wasn't some struggling actress desperate for work, and Violet Carson was an accomplished classical pianist, a trained singer, and a respected radio personality. The woman had style, refinement, and what contemporaries described as a dainty and pristine level of enunciation, far from the heavy-duty harshness that would typify Ena Sharples. Between the radio work and the musical performances, Carson had built something substantial. She'd worked as a cinema pianist back when films were silent, played the Goon Show recordings, performed classical pieces, and established herself as a serious musician.
In the
Oh,
blood...
button up, Martha, will you?
I thought you liked a bit of good music.
The transformation from that world to the hairnet and milk stout of Coronation Street wasn't just a career change. It was a complete reinvention of her public identity. Everything she'd built over 40 years in music and broadcasting would get swept away by one character. Tony Warren, Coronation Street's creator, remembered Carson from Children's Hour, where he'd appeared as a teenage actor back in '51. Legend has it that during one broadcast interruption, Carson played a song called Bolton's Yard, describing neighbors at addresses 1 through 12, which may have planted the seed for Coronation Street itself. The role of Ena Sharples remained uncast after 2 actresses proved unsuitable, and that's when Warren suggested Carson. She was the last actor to audition. And here's where you see the difference between Violet Carson and every other actress who might have played that part.
Ah, yes, these are the times when you find out who your true friends are. By heaven, they don't want you when you're old.
When Granada's producers suggested the character might be difficult to play, Carson's response was pure northern brass. Don't be ridiculous. I have lived with this woman all my life. She lives in every backstreet I know. That hairnet that became Ena's visual trademark was Carson's own addition, and she refused to let Granada's makeup department touch her carefully styled silver hair, so she wore her own hairnet instead. From the very first moment, she understood exactly who Ena Sharples was. Ena debuted as caretaker of the Glad Tidings Mission Hall, self-appointed moral guardian of Coronation Street, and 1/3 of the famous Snug Trio alongside Minnie Caldwell and Martha Longhurst. Those 3 women drinking milk stout in the Rover's Return Snug became one of British television's most beloved images.
When you have to answer to the good Lord for all the things you've said to me tonight. Oh, the young people of today.
Martha died suddenly from a heart attack in May of '64, the first major character death in British soap opera. And producer H.V. Kershaw later called it one of the worst decisions in Coronation Street history. They'd broken up something magical. The snug scenes worked because of the chemistry between those three women. Ena would hold court, passing judgment on everyone in Weatherfield, whilst Minnie and Martha provided the chorus. The dynamic felt real because it was real. Three actresses who understood the rhythms of northern working-class women, the gossip, the moral certainty, the milk stout that substituted for something stronger.
Well, I may be only an old pensioner with a bit of money in my pocket, but from now on I'll be spending it elsewhere.
When Martha went, something irreplaceable vanished from the show. Minnie carried on for another dozen years, but without Martha, the trio became a duo, and the snug was never quite the same. But the Ena-Elsie rivalry truly defined early Coronation Street. Pat Phoenix's Elsie Tanner once hissed at her, "They don't need sewers round here, they've got Ena Sharples." Their confrontations, particularly the 1961 Poison Pen Letter showdown that got likened to High Noon, became proper television events. Episodes regularly drew 18 to 21 million viewers during those peak years. In 1962, Coronation Street topped the ratings for 50 out of 52 weeks. This wasn't just popular telly, this was a national obsession. What made Ena work as a character was that she genuinely believed she was right about everything. She wasn't a villain, she was Weatherfield's conscience, the woman who'd tell you exactly what you were doing wrong and why you'd burn in hell for it. Carson played her without a shred of self-awareness, which is what made Ena both infuriating and oddly compelling. You couldn't dismiss her because she was absolutely certain in her moral superiority, and Carson never winked at the audience or played it for laughs. Ena Sharples was deadly serious about being Ena Sharples. Carson received the OBE in 1965, the first Coronation Street cast member to be honored that way. At the investiture, Queen Elizabeth supposedly told her, "I am a most ardent fan of yours." Whether those were the Queen's exact words or not, the sentiment was clear, and Ena Sharples had become an icon, with Violet Carson now inseparable from her. But here's the thing, nobody talks about enough. Playing Ena Sharples 50, 60, sometimes 80 episodes a year was absolutely knackering work, especially for a woman who was already in her 60s when it started. Carson's appearances grew sporadic in '72, and by the early '70s, the cracks started showing. Then came the real blow, early 1974, and she vanished from screens for 9 months. The Daily Express reported on the 5th of December that year that she'd suffered a near-nervous breakdown through overwork, and when she returned that Christmas, she was 2 stone lighter. Worse news arrived the following year. Carson suffered a stroke in '75, and from that point on, her appearances dropped to roughly 40 episodes annually. The production team adapted scenes around her limitations, with Ena increasingly shown seated in the Rovers or community center, rather than moving around Weatherfield. The character lost her final companion when Minnie Caldwell departed in April '76, and suddenly Ena Sharples was a much lonelier figure on screen. You can track the decline through the numbers. From 1960 to '71, she'd been in 50 to 80 plus episodes every year, a full-time cast member putting in the work. Health issues emerged, and by '72 and '73, that was already declining. In '74, she managed only about 6 episodes because of that 9-month absence. From '75 to '79, post-stroke, she was down to roughly 40 episodes annually. 1980, her final year, and Violet Carson appeared in just 5 episodes. Those final appearances in 1980 placed Ena in St. Anne's, staying with her friend Henry Foster whilst her community centre flat got renovated. Soap operas use this kind of temporary exit all the time when they need an actor to take a break, and it was the perfect setup. Her last words on screen were delivered to Ken Barlow and Albert Tatlock. "I'm fast coming to the conclusion, Albert Tatlock, that the air up there is much more to my liking than it is round here these days. And you can take that any way you like." Classic Ena, sharp, cutting, leaving the door wide open for her return. The episode aired on the 2nd of April 1980, and Violet Carson was 81 years old. Nobody knew it was goodbye. Not the producers, not the cast, not the millions of viewers who'd watched her for nearly 20 years. Everyone just assumed she'd be back in a few weeks when she felt better. Shortly after filming Wrapped, Carson developed pernicious anemia, a blood disorder that left her too weak to work. Surgery for an abscess followed in 81, and she never fully recovered from it. Granada Television was reportedly disappointed she couldn't return in 82 when Queen Elizabeth opened the new exterior set. Carson couldn't do it, and the illness had taken too much out of her. She retreated to her bungalow at 18 Fleetwood Road in Bispham, near Blackpool, where she'd lived with her sister Nellie since the 1920s. That house represented something important to Carson, a piece of her life that existed before Ena Sharples, a connection to the woman she'd been when she was still primarily known as a musician and broadcaster. The bungalow was her sanctuary, and in those final years, it became her fortress against a world that only wanted Ena. And here's where the story gets quite sad, really. Violet Carson refused all public appearances after retirement, and she made only 2 known exceptions. She recorded a telephone message for Julie Goodyear's "This Is Your Life" in October 1980, and she appeared in costume one last time for a TV Times special celebrating Coronation Street's 2000th episode that June. Her final television appearance came on the 15th of May, 81. A BBC Look Northwest interview filmed at her home, marking the closure of BBC Piccadilly Studios, where she'd spent her radio career. After that, nothing. She simply withdrew from public life completely, and whilst she was living out her final years in quiet seclusion, most of Britain still thought Ena Sharples was just temporarily away, visiting Henry Foster, due back any day now. But there's something else that needs discussing here, something that explains a lot about why Violet Carson retreated so completely. Her relationship with Ena Sharples was complicated in ways most people didn't understand, and in a 1978 TV Times interview, Carson delivered what might be the most revealing statement of her entire career. Violet Carson was destroyed the day Ena Sharples first appeared in Coronation Street. Think about that for a moment. This wasn't false modesty or an actress being dramatic. This was the truth as she saw it. She elaborated elsewhere, saying, "I don't want to be Sharples, that old bag, all my life. I want people to remember I'm Violet Carson." The contrast between actress and character was absolutely stark. Granada Television's tribute upon her death captured it perfectly. To viewers, Ena Sharples in her hairnet was the very personification of Coronation Street. To us, she was a lovely lady. Here was a classically trained musician, a woman of refinement and culture, forever buried under the persona of a sharp-tongued, judgmental battle axe in a hairnet. The truth is that Carson and Phoenix, despite their characters' legendary rivalry, had their own complicated relationship off-screen. Director Michael Apted later said that Violet Carson and Pat Phoenix were the biggest divas in Britain, and rumors persisted for years about tensions between them. Whether they actually came to blows or not, the friction between the two women added an extra layer of authenticity to the Ena-Elsie battles that viewers loved so much. Despite her frustrations, Carson accepted reality. She conceded that if being remembered as Violet wasn't possible, Ena was a good persona to have instead, and she found unexpected warmth in how children responded to the character. Children were not frightened of Mrs. Sharples. Children will come and hold Mrs. Sharples's hand. That clearly meant something to her, that despite playing this fierce old woman, children saw something comforting there. Boxing Day 1983, and Violet Carson died peacefully in her sleep at home in Bispham with her sister. She was 85 years old. Heart failure was the cause of death. Granada Television's tribute broadcast, a tribute to Violet Carson, aired 2 days later and drew 13.2 million viewers, and even in death, the public's affection for her remained enormous. Her memorial service at Manchester Cathedral on the 28th of February 84 attracted 500 mourners, including William Roach and Granada President Lord Bernstein. Sir Charles Groves conducted the BBC Philharmonic Orchestra, performing her favourite song, Cherry Ripe. She left an estate of £193,190, with bequests to the Grand Theatre Trust Blackpool and Sharp Street Ragged School Manchester. But here's the truly bizarre bit about all this. Ena Sharples was never formally killed off, and all the planned storylines were shelved during Carson's illness. The character just existed in this strange limbo, technically still alive somewhere in St. Anne's, visiting Henry Foster. The first canonical acknowledgement of Ena's death came in the 1985 spin-off video The Jubilee Years, where Ken Barlow mentions she died a couple of years ago. The first actual in-show reference didn't arrive until the 27th of November 1989, when Deirdre Barlow remarked, "Ena Sharples would be turning in her grave." Nearly a decade after Violet Carson's final appearance, nearly 6 years after her death, and only then does Coronation Street properly acknowledge that Ena Sharples is gone. The show couldn't quite accept it either, couldn't bring itself to put a full stop on a character who'd been there from the very beginning. The legacy Violet Carson left behind extends well beyond nostalgia. Ena Sharples established the television battle axe archetype, the sharp-tongued, morally unbending older woman that British soaps would return to again and again. EastEnders' Dot Cotton, Coronation Street's own Blanche Hunt, they all owe something to Ena. Director Michael Apted, who cut his teeth on Coronation Street, put it brilliantly. Forget bloody movie stars. Violet Carson and Pat Phoenix were the biggest divas in Britain. Everything I ever learned about actors, I learned from Coronation Street. The tangible remnants of Carson's career still pop up occasionally. A hairnet sold at auction for £65 in 2005, and Ena's double-breasted coat was preserved as the centerpiece of the Granada Studios Tour Costume Museum. There's even a Violet Carson rose cultivar, bred in '64, that appears renamed as Scarlet Carson in the film V for Vendetta. Madame Tussauds had wax figures. There's a blue plaque outside the old Granada studios. Little pieces of evidence that this woman existed, that she mattered, that she was more than just the character she played. But in the end, Violet Carson's greatest fear came true. Ask anyone who remembers her, and they'll talk about Ena Sharples. The hairnet, the sharp tongue, the battles with Elsie Tanner, the milk stout in the snug. Very few people remember Violet Carson. The classical pianist, Violet Carson, the radio personality, Violet Carson, who passed her senior honors examination at 12 years old, Violet Carson, who spent 5 years presenting Woman's Hour. Violet Carson, who played to 20 million listeners every week on Have a Go. She gave Coronation Street 1,148 episodes across 20 years, and she helped turn a regional soap opera into a national institution. She created a character so vivid, so real, that the show couldn't even bring itself to properly kill her off for nearly a decade. The cost of that achievement was the erasure of Violet Carson herself, buried so completely under Ena Sharples that even receiving the OBE, even meeting the Queen, couldn't separate the two in the public's mind. On the 2nd of April 1980, at 81 years old, Violet Carson filmed her final scene. She walked off the Coronation Street set believing she'd be back, Granada Television believed she'd be back, and the audience believed she'd be back. Pernicious anemia and age and exhaustion had other plans, and the most formidable woman British television ever produced simply faded away, her character left in permanent limbo, visiting a friend in St. Anne's, waiting for a return that would never come. Violet Carson wanted people to remember she was Violet Carson. Ena Sharples had already won that battle long before the cameras stopped rolling, and perhaps that's the real tragedy of her story. Not that she left Coronation Street without a proper goodbye, but that she'd lost herself to the character so completely that even in death, even nearly 45 years later, most people still can't tell where Ena Sharples ended and Violet Carson began.